Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. In the darkening dusk of Middle-earth, the whispers of a new terror moved through the land like the rising wind before a storm. The remnants of Sauron's defeat were still fresh in the minds of men, elves, and dwarves, but the peace they had fought so dearly to win felt fragile, like the stillness before chaos. Gondor stood proud, yet vigilant, its mighty towers casting long shadows over the lands that stretched before them, and it was in those shadows that the rumors grew. The invisible swordsmen, they were nothing more than a ghost story at first, a tale shared among frightened soldiers after the sudden destruction of an outpost on Gondor's borders. A fortress, once strong, had fallen in a single night, its defenders found lifeless, their bodies untouched by blade or fire. No arrows, no sign of a siege, just silence, and the creeping sense of something dark and unseen moving in the night. Gandalf, known now as Gandalf the White, heard these whispers and felt a familiar tug of dread. He had spent long years fighting the forces of shadow, and though Sauron had been defeated, he knew that evil had many faces. It was never truly vanquished, it only slept, waiting for the moment when the light wavered and darkness could return. And now, this tale of swordsmen who could disappear into thin air felt like the stirrings of that ancient malice once more. Summoned to Minas Tirith by King Aragorn, Gandalf listened as the reports of the attacks grew more frequent and more urgent. Aragorn, seated in his grand hall, looked to his old friend with the worry of a leader who had seen too much war already. "They strike from nowhere," Aragorn said, his voice quiet, heavy with the burden of kingship. "They leave no trace, no sign of battle, only death." Gandalf leaned on his staff, the white wood gleaming in the firelight. His eyes, sharp and ageless, scanned the reports before him. "It is not by chance that they come now," he murmured. "Nor do I believe this is the work of mortal men." Aragorn's gaze met his. "What do you think it is?" "Something older, something tied to the powers beyond this world," Gandalf replied, his mind racing through the ancient histories, the legends of Middle-earth that predated even the great wars against Sauron. "There are magics at work here that have been dormant for centuries. But I will find the source." And so began Gandalf's journey, once again through the lands of Middle-earth, seeking answers to the mystery of the invisible swordsman. He traveled to the farthest reaches of Gondor, where the last attack had occurred. The fortress stood in ruins, its walls breached not by siege weapons but by a force that defied explanation. Gandalf knelt by the stones, running his fingers over the ground. There, among the rubble, he found what he had hoped and feared he would discover: markings, faint but undeniable, etched into the earth like a scar. These symbols were not of the common tongue, nor of any language still spoken by the living. They were the marks of necromancy, an art long forbidden, tied to the world of the dead. Gandalf's heart sank. The invisible swordsmen were no ordinary foes, they were bound to something far darker than any mortal army. He rose, his cloak swirling in the wind that carried the scent of war. There was no time to waste. He needed answers, and there were few in Middle-earth who still remembered the old ways. He would go to Rivendell, to Elrond, the keeper of ancient wisdom. The journey to Rivendell was swift, but not without danger. Along the way, Gandalf encountered bands of orcs, remnants of Sauron's scattered forces. Though their master was gone, they were still drawn to power, still eager to destroy. With a sweep of his staff, Gandalf dispatched them, his magic crackling through the air like lightning. But even these skirmishes served as a reminder: Middle-earth was not yet free from the shadows that sought to reclaim it. When Gandalf arrived in Rivendell, the air was cool and serene, a stark contrast to the growing tension in the lands beyond. Elrond welcomed him with the grace of one who had seen the world change many times over, and together, they spoke of the legends that had long been forgotten by most. "There was once a king," Elrond said, his voice soft as he recalled the ancient tales. "A ruler of a land now lost to time. He was known for his power over the dead, a necromancer who could command armies of spectral warriors. He was banished from the realm of the living, trapped in a crypt far beneath the earth. If these swordsmen are his doing, then he has found a way to return. Gandalf's eyes narrowed. If he has returned, then Middle-earth is in grave danger. These swordsmen could be his vanguard, a force to weaken the defenses before a greater assault. Elrond nodded. You must find him, Gandalf. And you must stop him before it is too late. With that, Gandalf set out once more, this time in search of the crypt that Elrond had spoken of. His journey took him deep into the wilderness, far from the roads and settlements of men. The land grew wilder, the air colder, as though the very earth sensed the evil that slumbered beneath it. It was in the depths of a forgotten forest that Gandalf found the entrance to the crypt. Hidden among the roots of ancient trees, it was little more than a blackened stone door, etched with runes that pulsed faintly in the dim light. Gandalf hesitated for a moment, his hand resting on the door. He could feel the darkness within, the weight of centuries of death pressing against the barrier between worlds. With a muttered incantation, Gandalf opened the door, and the air around him grew cold, as if the crypt itself exhaled. He stepped inside, his staff glowing faintly to light his way. The walls were lined with the bones of warriors long dead, their armor rusted, their weapons broken. But there, at the center of the crypt, sat the ancient king. He was no more than a skeleton now, his once regal robes tattered and decayed. But his eyes at those empty sockets glowed with a malevolent light, and Gandalf knew in that instant that this was the source of the invisible swordsman's power. This was the king who had commanded armies of the dead, and now, somehow, he had found a way to return to the world of the living. The king's voice echoed through the crypt, though his jaw did not move. You are too late, Gandalf the White. My swordsmen are already spreading across your lands. Soon, all of Middle-earth will fall, and I will reign once more. Gandalf gripped his staff tightly, his voice calm but firm. You were banished to this tomb for a reason. You do not belong in this world. The king laughed, a sound that sent chills through the air. This world belongs to the strong, and I will take it back. With a wave of his hand, the crypt shook, and from the shadows emerged the invisible swordsmen. At first, they were nothing more than faint outlines, barely discernible in the darkness. But as they stepped forward, their forms solidified, their armor gleaming with an unnatural light. These were no ordinary warriors. They were bound to the king's will, and they moved as one, silent and deadly. Gandalf raised his staff, casting a shield of light around himself as the swordsmen attacked. Their blades struck with deadly precision, but Gandalf's magic held them at bay, his power a match for their spectral forms. He knew, however, that he could not defeat them here, not in this place where their strength was greatest. With a surge of energy, Gandalf sent a blast of light through the crypt, disorienting the swordsman long enough for him to retreat. He would need more than just his own power to defeat the Aima. He would need the help of Middle-earth's greatest warriors. He returned to Gondor, where Aragorn awaited him. The threat is worse than we feared, Gandalf said, his voice grim. The invisible swordsmen are not merely mortal soldiers. They are bound to an ancient king, a necromancer who seeks to reclaim Middle-earth for the dead. Aragorn's face hardened. Then we must rally the forces of the free peoples. We have defeated darkness before, we will do so again. Together, Gandalf and Aragorn sent out word to the leaders of men, elves, and dwarves, calling for a council to plan their defense. The forces of Middle-earth would need to unite once more if they were to stand against the coming tide of darkness. But even as they gathered their armies, Gandalf knew that the true battle lay at a battle not just of strength, but of magic, and the fate of Middle-earth hung in the balance. The armies of Middle-earth were assembling with a swiftness that spoke of their awareness of the looming threat. Gondor's banners flew high, joined by those of Rohan, and even the dwarves of Erebor had sent their finest warriors. Elven scouts from Lothlay, Cubed Reen and Mirkwood arrived silently, their presence barely detectable as they moved like shadows through the camp. At the heart of it all, Gandalf moved with quiet urgency, knowing that every second they delayed allowed the invisible swordsmen to spread their reach further across the lands. He could feel the growing tension in the air. Aragorn was restless, a warrior king used to decisive action. But Gandalf counseled patience. The enemy they faced was not one they could defeat through sheer force of arms. Their strategy would have to be one of cunning, of careful planning. The swordsmen could not be fought like regular soldiers. This was a war of the unseen, of the dead, and it required a different kind of battle. As night fell, the leaders gathered in Aragorn's tent, the dim light of a single lantern casting flickering shadows across their faces. The king stood at the head of the table, his eyes scanning the faces of those who had come to fight for the survival of Middle-earth. Legolas, silent and watchful, sat beside him, his keen senses attuned to every movement outside the tent. Gimli, seated across from the elf, grumbled quietly, sharpening his axe even as he listened intently. They had all fought in great battles before, but this was different. This was an enemy that could not be seen until it was too late. Gandalf stood at the center, his staff resting against his side. "Our enemy is not of this world," he began, his voice calm but commanding attention. "These swordsmen are bound to the will of an ancient king, a necromancer who has been imprisoned for centuries. He draws his power from the realm of the dead, and it is there we must strike." A murmur went through the gathered leaders. Aragorn leaned forward. "How do we fight what we cannot see?" Gandalf's eyes narrowed. "Their invisibility is not natural, it is a dark magic that can be undone. But to do so, we must sever their connection to their master. If the king falls, so too will his swordsmen." Legolas spoke for the first time. "And where is this king?" "That is what we must find out," Gandalf replied. "His power is growing, and soon, he will make his move. But there is a place where the boundary between the living and the dead is thin, a place where his magic will be at its strongest." Helm's Deep. Aragorn's face tightened. Helm's Deep had stood as a bastion of hope during the War of the Ring, but now it would become a battlefield once more. "Then we will make our stand there." Gandalf nodded. "But we must prepare. The swordsmen are not invincible, but they are formidable. I have been crafting weapons of blades and arrows imbued with magic, designed to disrupt their spectral forms. They will not be easy to kill, but they can be defeated." The leaders exchanged glances, a sense of grim determination settling over them. There was no turning back now. The battle would come, and they would face it together. The next days were spent in preparation. Gandalf worked tirelessly, weaving spells into the weapons that would be used against the invisible swordsmen. Legolas and the elves trained the archers, showing them how to shoot with precision even at unseen targets. The dwarves reinforced the fortifications, their skill with stone and metal unmatched. And all the while, Aragorn moved among his people, studying their resolve, reminding them of the victories they had won before. As the day of battle drew closer, a sense of anticipation hung over the camp. Helm's Deep was fortified once more, its high walls and deep caverns ready to withstand the coming onslaught. But this time, the enemy would not come in waves of orcs or Uruk-hai. This time, they would face an enemy that could slip through even the most carefully laid defenses. On the eve of the battle, Gandalf stood on the battlements, looking out over the plains. The air was still, but he could feel the darkness gathering. The invisible swordsmen were close. He could sense them, just beyond the horizon, waiting for the moment to strike. Beside him, Aragorn stood silently, his hand resting on the hilt of an 8 superscript Auril. "Do you think we're ready?" he asked quietly. Gandalf didn't answer immediately. He had lived through many wars, seen countless battles fought for the fate of Middle-earth. This battle would be different, but the stakes were no less dire. "We have done all we can," he said at last. "Now, we must trust in our strength and in each other." The night passed in tense silence, the soldiers on the walls keeping a wary watch. But the invisible swordsmen did not come with the rising of the sun. Instead, they waited until the shadows grew long once more, until the light of day began to fade. And then, without warning, they struck. The first sign of the attack was a sudden, chilling wind that swept through the valley. The torches flickered and went out, plunging Helm's Deep into near darkness. The soldiers on the walls tensed, their weapons at the ready, but there was nothing to see, only the oppressive weight of something unseen moving through the night. Then came the first blow. A soldier, standing near the gate, let out a strangled cry as he was lifted off his feet by an invisible force. His body crumpled to the ground, lifeless, as the others drew their weapons and prepared for battle. Gandalf was already moving, his staff raised high as he sent a beam of light slicing through the air. The light illuminated the faint outlines of the invisible swordsmen as spectral figures, clad in ghostly armor, their swords gleaming with an unnatural light. They moved with terrifying speed, slipping through the ranks of the defenders, their blades cutting through flesh and armor with ease. But the defenders of Helm's Deep were not unprepared. The enchanted weapons Gandalf had crafted glowed with a faint blue light, and as the soldiers struck out at the invisible forms, the magic disrupted their spectral bodies, causing them to flicker and fade. It was not easy. Each swordsman seemed to melt into the shadows the moment they were struck, only to reappear elsewhere, but it was enough. The soldiers could fight back. Aragorn led the charge, and a tilde superscript a real flashing in the dim light as he cut through the ghostly forms. Legolas stood atop the walls, his arrows flying with deadly precision, each one finding its mark even in the darkness. Gimli, wielding his axe with grim determination, struck down any swordsman who came too close, his laughter ringing out as he fought beside his old friends once more. But the swordsmen kept coming. For every one they defeated, two more seemed to take its place. The defenders were holding their own, but Gandalf knew that they could not keep this up forever. The invisible swordsmen were not bound by the same physical limits as the living. They did not tire, and they did not bleed. The only way to end the battle was to destroy their master. Gandalf raised his staff once more, sending a pulse of light across the battlefield. "To me!" he called, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We must find the king." Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli fought their way to his side, and together, they moved toward the heart of the battle. The invisible swordsmen seemed to sense their purpose, and they closed in, their ghostly forms swirling like mist around them. But Gandalf's magic held them at bay, and the group pushed forward, cutting through the spectral warriors as they went. At the center of the battlefield, where the walls of Helm's Deep met the mountainside, Gandalf felt a surge of dark energy. The air crackled with power, and there, standing on a rise, was the undead king. His skeletal form was draped in tattered robes, his crown gleaming with a sickly light. His eyes, glowing with malevolent fire, fixed on Gandalf. "You cannot stop what has already begun," the king's voice echoed across the battlefield, his words dripping with malice. "I will rule this world, both the living and the dead." Gandalf stepped forward, his staff glowing with power. "You were defeated once, and you will be defeated again," he said, his voice steady. The king laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. "You are a fool if you think your light can save them." With a wave of his hand, the king summoned a wall of spectral warriors to his side. They surged forward, a wave of death that threatened to overwhelm the defenders. But Gandalf did not falter. He raised his staff high, and with a blinding flash of light, he unleashed the full power of his magic. The spectral forms shuddered and flickered, their connection to the king weakening. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli fought beside him, their weapons cutting through the fading swordsmen. And as the light intensified, the undead king let out a roar of fury. His form began to disintegrate, his power unraveling as Gandalf's magic severed his hold over the dead. With a final, desperate cry, the king was consumed by the light, his body crumbling to dust. The invisible swordsmen, no longer bound by his magic, dissolved into the night, their forms dissipating like mist in